All right, good evening, I guess. It's March 6th. Thank you for coming to the Oregon Public Defense Commission work group. I wanted to start off briefly updating the people who are here about legislative issues. There are two bills that directly affect the commission that have been considered yesterday and today. It was supposed to be just yesterday, but it carried over to today because there were so many people who testified, and the presentations took a while for the people who were presenting. House Bill 2614 with 3 amendments, and then the other House bill that I can't remember the number of. The one that I can't remember the number of is the that has the regional district defenders, and Rep. Evans talked about that today briefly. What had the most attention was 2614, which has 3 components to it. The first, a set of amendments would change the work group or the workload standard to a constitutionally mandated rather than national workload or best practices. And it would sunset the consortia ending date to 2029. And I can't remember the third thing. There's 3 main things. Jesse can remind us. And then the -2 amendments are really surrounding commissioner or commission independence. And that was if those amendments get absorbed into a bill, they would essentially remove the sunset clause from July 1st, 2027, and have us remain with the governor making decisions about the hiring, firing of the executive director. Commission members would serve at the pleasure of the governor and could be removed at will for no cause. Same thing with the director, could be removed at will, subject to Senate confirmation, which is consistent with other executive branch agencies, and would prohibit us from taking a position on legislation, would put us under the complete administrative authority of the governor's office, would require us to submit our bills, our budget bill directly to the governor, and then we would be completely subsumed in the governor's budget rather than presenting it to the legislature. And then the -3 amendments, which my understanding is don't really have legs, is requiring all lawyers, licensed lawyers, to work 120 hours every 3 years in public defense. Doesn't have any compensation legislation, and it would also require us to train them to be able to do that. Okay, so there's that. So as you can imagine, the bulk of the testimony was about the consortia sunset and the national workload standards, whether or not it should be changed to constitutionally mandated or national workload standards. It became pretty clear that the reason for that amendment, Rep. Croft talked about this, was that they don't like the national workload standard, and they didn't like that we adopted it, even though we were supposed to do that, because it lowers caseloads, which is going to, in their mind, exacerbate the problem with unrepresented. So they want to lower the bar to constitutionally mandated caseload, which, I mean, I would say the national workload study is the constitutional mandate, but that's just my opinion. And also testimony about the sunset clause for consortia. There seemed that I think is definitely going to happen, because there's widespread support for not getting rid of consortia will destabilize the system. And there was some testimony about the independence piece. It's clear that some legislators are not pleased with what the commission has done in terms of adopting a 6-year plan that costs too much money, that is not feasible in the current budget. Well, I guess the exact quote is aspirational rather than pragmatic. And Also, I think a fair summary of some of the criticism is that we seem to be focused on long-term solutions rather than short-term crisis, and we've heard that before. So this legislation is in part a response to that, and also directly at the request of the governor's office, which is not a surprise. The governor requested this exact same thing when during 337, she said, well, if you're good, I'm paraphrasing. If you're going to make me take these people, this is what I need from you. I need them to be just like everyone else in the executive branch. And the legislature said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to let them keep their independence, and we're going to have you take them. So this is just her saying, I told you this already, and this is what I want. So it's not a surprise. It's not new. But, you know, we pushed back last time, and we're pushing back this time. So my understanding is the Sixth Amendment Center folks are helping the legislature understand about the importance of commission independence. I testified yesterday about that, and Representative Buckley, in his individual capacity, gave a very full-throated defense today of independence and full-throated support of the executive director in his comments, and I thought did just a fantastic job of just really telling them how the commission feels, even though he was doing it individually, and he did not pull any punches. So it would be well worth your time to look at the testimony. It happened at about 3:20 or so this afternoon. If you want to take a look at what he said, he did answer questions. There were just one or two questions. And he just did a great job. So I really appreciate his contributions. So it's clear that this is going to be a continuing topic of conversation, and that the governor's office came and testified, of course, in support of the amendments, and said essentially we need this to be able to hold the commission accountable and hold the agency accountable to fix the unrepresented crisis, and they need to be like every other executive agency, which is, again, completely understandable that that's her position. In my comments, which I will forward to you, I also submitted them in written form. So same comments, I just did it in a letter form and uploaded them so they'd be on the record. Point out that this was not, that our comments were not at all directed toward the governor, that we appreciate her support. It was, you know, about the principle of independence, and also making sure that if we had a governor that was not as supportive of public defense in the future, that the Oregonians' rights would be protected by ensuring that the commission remained independent. So that's kind of an update. If you have any questions, let me know. But you can actually look, the comments I looked today, they're on OLIS attached to the bill, and you can click on each of them and pull them up. Go ahead, Rob.
Thanks. I watched yesterday and today until I just jumped off, obviously. But Peter Buckley did great. I think he put it in some historical context for the folks who are new to that panel, that committee. And you know, I think Jennifer, you also were involved in a lot of this, but I was on the future of public defense. I know CDLA 4 years ago, 3 years ago, when this was discussed, I was co-chair of that. I was on the 337 task force. This was a negotiated bill.
Yeah.
We knew we were in a crisis. The crisis was not as bad as it is now, but we knew it was going to be a crisis. We knew we had shortages. We knew all the problems. We knew it. One of the issues of moving to the governor's office is we're going to fall out of we're not going to be in judiciary where we had been not necessarily protected or coddled, but understood. And the long-term issues we had to deal with were caseloads, compensation, and the short term was the crisis. One of our big fears as providers and administrators and people who are advocates for this work was that if we handed a crisis situation over to a leader who is very, supportive, but also has to juggle school district budgets and various other things, that we would have the same, it would become worse because we would have the same old-fashioned utilized solutions, which are cut our pay or freeze our pay and increase our caseloads, which they've done every time there's a problem here. And they would look at that as a short-term solution. And it's not a short-term nor a long-term solution. In fact, that's what caused this problem now. And so all we asked for was a 2-year period at which time we would have an opportunity to work our way out of this. These things were key to it. Caseloads, some caseload standards, pay parity was key to this. We had to have these things that were not going to be gutted once we moved over to an agency that had a wider scope of needs for the state. We had to be able to go to the legislature to lobby for our POPs and our increases. What we feared and what we thought we were protecting, we shouldn't be renegotiating the deal. This deal should not be renegotiated.
So
Just because it's
to,
tough,
if you would like to point that out in as an individual capacity, you are more than welcome to do that to the legislature and give some historical context for the deal that was made. You could do it to 48 hours after the hearing.
Yeah, I was creating an email to myself during the middle of this last hearing with these points, and I'm thinking that people are not putting this in context.
Right.
They're not putting this in the right. Peter did, but many other people didn't. That's a good idea. Maybe I'll do a letter in my individual capacity and send it to the House committee.
Susan?
I think the bottom line, though, is that they have the power to impose a different deal on us.
Yep.
And I think there's 3 parts of it. They have the power to do that, obviously. The second part is that they don't want to pay for the number of attorneys that it would take to fix the problem. And I understand that there are budget issues and that there are other demands on the budget. But, requiring lawyers to work unethically is not going to work, because lawyers won't do that if they're ethical lawyers. And requiring lawyers to provide representation when they don't know how to do that kind of case is not going to work. Again, there will be a lot of pushback to that. So the bottom line there is that at some point they have to understand that this is something they need to fund. But I think the third part of the problem is that there's nobody who seems to have the A, ability, and B, willingness to make the entities on the demand side of this problem come to the table and help find a solution.
Yeah, we heard that clearly today from the DAs again, saying, we're not going to do anything about charging because that's not fair to ask us to do that. You just need to fix this problem.
Well, it's not just the DAs. I mean, it's at least some of the courts.
Yeah.
Because I've been talking to some lawyers in Multnomah County and Washington County, and they're telling me, as we've talked before, about cases that are either set over or dismissed the day of trial because the prosecutor doesn't have its witnesses or they're not prepared for some other reason. And they've been talking to me about how many hours they are then wasted that they've prepared for the trial that day that has to be redone, how many hours they've wasted in appearing for conferences and appearing in court and waiting for court, and the number of new clients they could take if those hours were available. and that they don't see the judges in their districts taking control of the problem. And so I think that the demand side includes both the prosecutors and the courts. And nobody wants to make them come to the table and help find a solution. So until they're willing to pay for a system that doesn't corral the demand side, or they're willing to get the demand side to come up with a solution that they're willing to pay for, I don't think the problem's going to be solved.
Yeah.
Certainly
So
we can't solve it.
Yeah, I feel like we've spent a lot of time over the last 2+ years chasing our own tail. And it's getting, I mean, it's we have to find a way to change the narrative, and we have to find a way to do what we can do that's within our control, and then say, okay, listen, we're doing everything that we can do. Here are the tangible things that we can do. We're showing you what we can do. We need other people to come to the table. Tom?
So first of all, thank you very much for your leadership, and thanks to Jessie for her leadership. And I really
Yes.
appreciate the comments by Susan and Rob and agree with those comments. So I'm trying to understand the sentiment of the criticism, and the way it was explained to me that kind of made some sense is sort of the perfect is the enemy of the good.
Mm.
And this idea that, for example, by analogy to the problem of homelessness in Portland, a solution that consists solely of building new housing, which would be optimal, but may not be cost efficient, needs to be sort of complemented by a lower cost, more readily accessible solution. But as Susan points out, you really can't have half ethical lawyering. We really can't do half of what the ethical rules require. And I'm troubled by this notion that the constitutional minimum could be the floor, because the bar won't abide that. The whole premise of the ethics rules is that there's an ethical obligation for all Oregon attorneys, the only people who can practice in Oregon court, that demands much more than what's minimally sufficient under the Constitution, both the Oregon and federal constitutions. And it's very well settled that unethical lawyering can withstand constitutional scrutiny, but that lawyer can get booted from the Oregon bar. This is true throughout the country. The bars always pitch their requirements higher than what the Constitution requires. So I'm glad we're holding firm. But I do have to say, the whole task has been framed for us by 337, and I'm frustrated that we're getting a lot of heat for things like, the phase out of consortia, which is, as I understand it,
Peter said that as a big part of it. He's like, you told us to do this and we did it. You told us to do that, we did it. You told us to do this and we did it. And now you're upset because we did all these things that you told us to do, and you want to change our independence and our structure because of it. I mean, he was just like, so yeah, you're exactly right.
May I add one point? And I just wanted to follow up with Jennifer. You made the comment that this -3 bill, which I understand is proposed by either Representative or Senator Smith from Port Orford, that would require 120 hours of every lawyer who enters an appearance in 2025, whether it's a civil, criminal lawyer. Those people must do apparently uncompensated work by 2028. I don't want to underestimate the appeal of that approach. And I do recall, I've been here for a while. I grew up in Oregon, but I recall in 2003, when there was a shortfall of funding, maybe some of you remember this, there was a lot of talk throughout the state that when they ran out of money for public defense, I think in April, and the biennium didn't end until July, there's a lot of talk on both sides of the aisle about simply compelling attorneys
Oh yeah.
to represent without compensation the people who are unrepresented. And finally, if I recall correctly, Wally Carson just put his foot down and said, no, we're not doing that. But he had to because that was building a little bit of momentum. So I just hope we're not underestimating, well, that idea doesn't have legs, as you say, and it's proposed by the minority party. I do worry that the frustration may lead to some sort of compulsory representation requirement, maybe one not so onerous as 120 hours in 3 years, but I just hope we'll put something in the record explaining why that's off limits, because it does appear people are really casting around for ideas. And I mean, you could do it. I mean, it's not a taking of attorney's labor. You can
Well,
make that a requirement for bar licensure, right? I mean, so it really could be mandated. It wouldn't be unconstitutional. It's just a horrible idea.
yeah, I mean, Rep. Cruft's comments were, it would be very difficult for me to have to do work in an area where I don't know anything about doing that kind of work. And that's all I'll say, is what he said. And he's the chair of the committee. So I feel like that was a pretty clear sign that bill wasn't going to go anywhere. But I mean, you're right. I mean, people are grasping at straws at this point. It could pop up somewhere at some point.
Could I just make one last comment or query? Is there sort of a concerted defense of Jessie? I just worry that she's becoming a figurehead for a problem that is sort of beyond her individual agency to control.
Well, I would
Especially in light of
say,
what happened with Executive Director Singer, I hope that the vilification of the executive director is not the only playbook for critics of the public defense scenario, because that's, it didn't work last time. And I just feel like we need a bolder vision than that. And, I don't know if people how are we rallying to support Jesse?
well, so the commission specifically, that's outside now of our scope of authority because it's solely in the governor's authority. So the commission can't take a position on that because it's not part of our statutory duties. Peter, in his individual comments today, I would say gave a very clear, he said the executive director is doing a great job. She, as evidenced by her presentation to you yesterday, she has taken an agency that was in complete chaos when I joined the commission 2.5 years ago and is, worked through it and turned it into a well-functioning agency. Look at the information she was able to provide you yesterday. She has a close relationship with LFO. She's doing a great job. We're really, very, very strong endorsement. And so, I think in our individual capacities, again, we are able to do all kinds of things that we can't officially do as a commission. So I'll just put that out there in that regard. But yeah, I in my individual capacity think Jesse's doing a great job, and not as the chair of the commission because I can't say that, but yes, I agree. And it would be, and I know that without going too far or saying anything inappropriate. I have talked to legislators who feel that way as well, that think that she's doing a very good job. We know there's at least one member of our commission who's a legislator who does not feel that way. And ultimately, it's up to the governor. And I hope, you're right, I hope that it doesn't, this problem doesn't become Jesse's problem, because we would set us back a very, 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 it would be disastrous to change the executive director. Alton.
Sorry I'm late, but
Right.
can you catch me up? Because I do have something to say, but I want to make sure my thinking of what I'm going to say is right.
Yeah, so a couple things before I do that, and I will do that really quickly. Jesse has a hard stop at 6:30 today, so we're gonna, at least Jesse's gonna wrap up at 6:30, and she has to go. And I'm being pretty mindful of the time because we do want to talk about the proposed contract policies changes, so we could spend just a few more minutes talking about this, and we can pivot to that. But essentially, we had testimony at the legislature on a bill that would do a number of things. Including stripping the commission of its independence and put us solely in the under the purview of the governor, and would really curtail a lot of the things that we are able to do now, including talk about legislation, hire and fire the executive director in 2 years. Commissioners could be removed without cause. Also wants to change the workload standards to be what's constitutionally mandated instead of national and regional best practices. would sunset, would keep the consortia, at least until 2029. So there was testimony yesterday and testimony today about that, and you can watch the testimony online on OLIS and also read the the testimony that was submitted. And I gave testimony yesterday and then gave my testimony as submitted. I submitted it in writing as well for the record. So that's the catch up.
So it's kind of what I was thinking. But as Tom was talking and toward the end of what Susan was saying, I'm gonna tell y'all from and this is from my personal experience with public defense, but also with the systems that I've been involved with as well then as an addict and in the criminal justice system, and having to rely on services provided by the county. And this, I don't know how you guys are going to take this, and this is not a conspiracy theory at all, but it's almost as if relating to the commission and and OPDC directly, it's almost like they want us to fail so that they can point the finger. And I mean, I'm gonna keep it a buck, man. I've been through so many programs where, you know, they put us in the program, but then they added this. They kept raising the bar on us so that we never got a chance to reach the finish line. And I've been on this commission, I believe, longer than any of you. And every single time the bar has been raised. It didn't matter what we did as a commission. It didn't matter what was going on in OPDC. They always raised the doggone bar. We never got a chance to reach the finish line. I'm so and I appreciate you so much, Jennifer. I truly appreciate and love you, Jesse. I think you're doing a wonderful job, and I got your back. But it just seems like I mean, man, it's so reminiscent of my past, y'all. It's so and y'all have no idea about what that's like, but I do, and it's so reminiscent of it. Okay, that's all.
No, it's a fair point. I appreciate it. And Peter, you know, kind of talked about that a little bit. He made some comments. He testified today, and he basically said, you know, you asked us to do all these things, and we did all these things, and now you want to change things because you don't like how we did the things that you told us to do. So, I mean, he made that point, I think, in a higher, 10,000 foot view looking down. But yeah, I mean, it's fair. It's a fair comment.
But what do we do then? Like, where do we go from here?
Well, so I think we just have to make sure we keep the legislature continues to hear our voices and hear our opinion. I mean, one of the things that happened, unfortunately, because of lots of transition in the 337 arena, you know, the issues, all of the bills were baked by the time the commission finally weighed in. And so I feel much better now. Maybe we're just shouting into the void, but I feel much better now because we're at least coming in at the beginning saying, hey, from the ground up. And the other thing is, you know, the work group is ongoing. I asked Jessie and she asked a couple times, and they have finally agreed to let a voting member of the commission be on the work group. The work group meets for the next 2 Mondays, and I am not able to make those meetings because I'm going to be gone. Susan is not able to make the meetings, but frankly, I think the perfect person to go is Peter. And so I've asked Jessie, so I've asked Jessie to reach out and see if Peter can do that. Of course, he's in Ashland, and so if they let him do it remotely, I think there's a much higher likelihood that he'll be able to participate. But if not, I'm going to find someone. One of our voting members is going to be there because we need to have a seat at the table. We asked for a seat. We have a seat. Now we have to take it. And I could go Monday, but I can't go the next Monday. So I think it really needs to be the same person. So we'll make that happen. But, and you know, that's how we do this. We just get in on the ground. And the other thing that's happening that's very important and very encouraging is that the Sixth Amendment Center has been invited and asked by the legislature to consult on this bill. And they are, of course, huge advocates for, I mean, 337 looks the way it does because of the Sixth Amendment Center. we maintained our independence and the caseload standards and all of that because of the Sixth Amendment Center. So having them not be us, you know, we have our own interests, right? We're, you know, we're anything we say self-serving, but they come in and they get to talk about why it's important to do the things that we want them to do. And it's coming from someone that's not us is just really the best case scenario. So I think that's the way we do it. We just have to make sure that we take advantage of every opportunity we have to tell people why we need to do the thing the right way and not to cut corners. That's how we got here to begin with. So, Susan, and then we're going to
Yeah.
talk about contract amendments.
I'm wondering, in addition to all the things we've said so far, I wonder, you know, not very many legislators are lawyers. And I think that there's an attitude even among some lawyers that there's nothing to do in criminal defense. I remember feeling that from my law professors, that, you know, that people who do corporate law are, you know, that's really hard. It really takes a smart person to do corporate law, but anybody can do criminal defense, which is not true. For those of us who've done
Opposite,
criminal
yeah.
defense, we know that is not true. But I wonder how much people need to be educated on what an ethical criminal defense attorney actually does and why it is complicated and sophisticated. And you can't just have a warm body with a law degree and a little bit of training to go in there and do it. And I'm wondering if we should add to our narrative information about why it takes a hardworking, intelligent, extraordinarily well-trained person to do this kind of work ethically. Just a thought.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea. All right, and with that, I'll turn it over to Jesse to talk about proposed contract policy changes and legislation. And I don't know if many of you had the opportunity to review the information that the policy changes that came with the agenda for today, but Jesse's going to go over those now.
All right, thank you. So we are looking at a budget cycle that would be a current service level budget for our contracts. And that current service level budget does not include inflationary increases. It doesn't include S&S, services and supplies, I think is what that stands for. And we're being asked to do a lot with that budget. And we've heard from many system partners that MAC is not a flexible tool, that it is too rigid, and that there's ways that that could be improved to be better utilized on the ground. To that end, the agency started a process of looking at policies that the commission could adopt to modify our existing contracts to make MAC a bit more flexible and efficient. Mara, do you have the slides handy? Oh, she has our slides up.
I do.
Oh.
I haven't shared the screen. I'll go ahead and do that.
Oh, okay. I was like, I don't see them.
I have a question.
I just have them ready to go.
I have a question before you do that. And it just popped into my head, and I think I know the answer, but it's also really, really important for context. So our current service level budget is based on, I mean, a combination of that plus the caseload forecast, right?
Yeah, so we take our current service level budget is the previous
Right.
caseload, right? The 23 to 25 caseload. And then the units in which we buy public defense, right? Which is MAC is the unit in which we buy public defense. So you take the 2023-25 caseload, you divide it up by MAC. That's our current service level budget. But our current service level budget that we're talking about right now will include the new caseload forecast. So the DAS Office of Economic Analysis has done 2 public defense caseload forecasts. The most recent one came out in October. I want to say the next one comes out in April. That April forecast will impact our current
Bake
service
in, right.
level for this next contract cycle. So if caseload goes up, we would see an increase in the number of MAC units that we're buying. If caseload goes down, we would see a decrease in the number of MAC units that we're buying. So it will be adjusted with the new caseload forecast.
But so here's my question. That's the forecast. That we got no money for the 4,800 people who are sitting there without a lawyer, right?
Yeah, the forecast is all about new cases
Prospective.
filed in the next biennium. It's prospective, not it's not open caseload, so it doesn't talk about the cases that exist on people's desks right now. And it doesn't talk about the backlog of public defense cases that is the unrepresented persons crisis.
So shouldn't we be talking about that? About how, I mean, I know we have to be careful about how we talk about that, but I mean, I think, so what we're hearing now is we gave you $100 million last time. We gave you what you asked for. You told us this is what it was going to cost. We gave you what you asked for. Now there's still all these people on the list and it's worse. And we don't want to keep doing this. What do you need? I think one of the things that's really important for us to talk about is you're not giving us any money to try to clear the 4,800 people.
We can certainly talk about that when we do our budget presentation on the 17th around what is the caseload forecast, what isn't the caseload forecast, and make sure that people have information about that.
I think that's really important. And I'm sorry, it just occurred to me now when we're super late in this process, but I thought, wait a minute, we still have a hole to fill. It doesn't matter what's coming, we still have the hole. Rob?
Yeah, I think you guys actually covered what I was going to mention, that I think the forecast needs to include not just cases that are filed, but it includes cases you want us to take. That's the forecast. If you're not including them, you're not forecasting us taking those cases. But I'm assuming they do want us to take those cases over the next biennium.
I would say with great confidence they want us to take those cases.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, actually, though. And I like the way that's framed.
Okay, so putting the caseload forecast aside, we are doing an exercise in sort of thinking about how we might be able to adjust our contracts to make MAC more of a flexible tool. Mara, could you share your screen for those slides? Next one, please. So first, I wanted to put up a time frame in front of you all. I will note that we had an opportunity to meet with public defenders on February 27th and to talk with people doing the work about these proposals. The feedback that we got was very critical of a lot of the proposals. You know, people, but I'm happy to say people were really engaged. The meetings were well attended and folks let us know that they saw a lot of potential pitfalls and problems with these proposals. And we are working to memorialize that feedback for the commission's consideration in a memorandum, and a draft of which has been completed, but wasn't completed early enough for me to distribute it all to you all today. So before this comes in front of our full commission meeting, we will include that memorandum with the providers' feedback, because they spent a lot of time thinking about this stuff and gave us some pretty detailed information on what they thought the impacts would be. We are looking to next week distribute this information to the Oregon Judicial Department and to the Oregon District Attorneys Association. We've already heard from them, because they've seen our draft policies online, that they have thoughts, concerns, questions about some of these policies as well. So I think we will get some robust feedback from those stakeholder groups as well. And I'm really pleased about the level of engagement that we're getting. Susan?
I need to understand better why we're getting input from prosecutors and what we're going to do with that input, because I believe that the judicial department, I can see where these policies would affect what they do, and they need to go along with a lot of them, and I think they act in good faith with regards to these kinds of things, but I don't know that the district attorneys act in good faith with regards to anything. So why are we seeking their input, and what are we going to do with it?
We are seeking the input of all of the criminal justice stakeholders because this stuff has to be operational in courtrooms. And so we want to make sure that we aren't overlooking key components of how this would actually work or having unintended consequences. So we want to hear from everybody about what they see as potential pitfalls or outcomes or consequences of these policies. And then we will provide that information to the commission, and it will be up to you all to decide what you actually do with the information. But we do want to make sure, you know, historically the agency has made big decisions in a silo and hasn't gotten input from other folks, and then you know, was surprised by some of the downstream consequences. So we just want to make sure we're looking at all angles.
I just think we have to be very cautious to not fall into a trap of making changes that will end up getting in the way of what we need to do, just because prosecutors have identified things they don't like. Put it that way.
I will also note this is a very aggressive timeline, but in order for us to move our contracts forward, we have to go through a process of legal sufficiency review with the Department of Justice. And if these policies are required to be followed as part of those contracts, they will have to go through that process of legal sufficiency review with the Department of Justice. So our current contracts are set to expire at the end of June. We are under a pretty tight timeline to make any sort of adjustments to those contracts and get through that process. All right, let's talk about the policies. And I just have the same slides that we used during the judiciary presentation yesterday. So I'll run through them pretty quickly, but really this is an opportunity for you all to talk about it. Mara, can you go to the next slide? The first slide is around partial waiting for early withdrawal. So under our current contract, we don't give any MAC to cases when the lawyer withdraws within the first 5 days. We give 50% MAC if they withdraw within the first 30 days and 100% MAC if they withdraw after 30 days. As a practical matter for out of custody cases, first appearance is often set more than 30 days after arraignment and the appointment of counsel. So you're pretty much always giving 100% MAC unless there is an immediate conflict, like a co-defendant case or something that's identified really early on. But in terms of cases that go into warrant status or cases where there's a breakdown in the attorney-client relationship, you're pretty much always going to be giving 100% of the case credit. So we looked at changing both the timelines and the distribution of this weight. And in so doing, what we looked at was actually the time to disposition standards for cases and tried to align the weighting with the time to distribution for different case types so that it would be more fair, because it takes a lot longer to resolve a murder case than it does a misdemeanor case. I will note that there are some implementation concerns that the agency has around the partial waiting for early case withdrawal. And that really comes down to, right now, under our max standard, it's an assigned, you get credit for how many cases you take in a period of time. So it's over the course of a year, how many new cases you get. And we've prorated it for every month. So if I take a case in January and then I withdraw from the case in July, what would happen under our current system is that MAC credit would be reduced from January when I got the case assigned to me, not from July when I am actually withdrawing from the case. So this is really a kind of a workload principle that's being put into a caseload model, and it's not a clean fit. In order to do something of this nature, we would have to, I think, reduce the MAC in the month in which the person withdrew from the case, as opposed to reducing the MAC in the month in which that MAC assignment is made. It also is a fairly complex reduction process. And right now we rely on our providers to accurately provide caseload reporting to us every month. And this adds a lot more complexity to that system. So there will definitely be challenges around implementation for this policy.
Also, can I just ask, how are you going to track the data for this? I mean, because if the caseload reports are due, and I know we're going to try to change the timeline, but the caseload reports are due after the reporting period, whatever time period that is. And then you're reporting something that's retroactive. I mean, it seems like for the assignment of counsel piece and tracking cases, this is going to be very difficult to do. Is that fair to? I mean, the amount of staffing, both on the provider side and at the agency side, seems like pretty excessive, A. And B, do we have any data about what kind of an impact this will make on MAC?
I'm going to take the last part of that question first, which is that we are working on data for all of these policies. It's been a fast moving process. So our data team has copies of the policies. We're starting to work through that. We know that that's information we want to provide to the full commission when this stuff comes in front of you. We've also had some conversations with OJD about what data they might be able to provide on this. So I hope to come forward in the future with a much better answer to that question. As to the first part, I think you're right. This is a labor-intensive, staff-intensive process. Tom?
Thank you for explaining all these potential modifications for the MAC model. I think that's a good idea. Just friendly amendment, the noun form of withdraw is withdrawal, like AL at the end. And then my question is, why did we shrink 0 to 5 days all the way down to 24 hours? So for example, I'm not sure it'll be evident that conflicts, preclude the representation. I know that's obvious when there's a co-defendant, but some people may have conflicts based on past representation that aren't known within 24 hours. Could you explain a bit about why we shrunk 0 to 5 days down to 24 hours?
I think we looked at other systems and that we saw that replicated there, but it's good feedback, and I can take it back to the team that that we need to prove out the reason for that particular change.
And I just want to kind of put this out there. We're seeing these hatchet chainsaw cuts across the federal government for all of these, oh, we're going to make this change, we're going to make that change. And then when you look at it in the context of the overall effect it's going to have on the system in terms of dollars, it's like, pennies, right? So that's that's just as a general and broad comment. I mean, I think it's important to, obviously, to be good fiscal stewards of the taxpayer dollars, but I don't want to cost the agency so much time and money trying to implement, and the providers too, right? All the time to implement these when the savings is minuscule and won't have a significant impact on the issue that we're really trying to resolve. But that's just like a broad comment.
Yeah. Rob?
Things. I'll make a couple of other, I guess, broad comments on to Tom's point, the 24 hours, 0 to 5 days, and then it's 24 hours for no credit. I would, just having done this like Jennifer has for years and years and years and doing these monthly reports and everything, I would say 48 hours is about right. That's sort of a compromise between in and out of custody things. Because by then you've got your discovery requests out and maybe you've seen the client either in custody or out of custody. So, but usually if you're going to have a substitution of counsel, it usually happens in about 48 hours. I think that if you just go back to the current process, and I would change 0 to 5 to 48 hours, and I think 31 plus days. I would add probably that 90-day pay rate for people who are beyond 31 days, but prior to disposition of the case. We talked about that, about encouraging people to complete these cases if at all possible. But I think I would make more minor changes to the current policy than what you're proposing. That's just my blunt takes on it. I read this morning, maybe yesterday. And I think Jennifer's right about how much are we really saving by making these changes? What kind of grief are we causing to everybody? And what are the real savings? It's nice to do something, but it's more important to do something that's effective and substantive. And I do like, Jesse, your proposed change about if we're going to debit caseload, let's do it the date the debit occurs, not to go back when the credit was first issued. It makes it's not my administrator, but it makes the consortia contractors, administrators' lives so much easier if you don't go back and have to redo all these reports.
Well, plus if we're really trying to impact MAC, you want to do it when you withdraw, not 6 months earlier.
Right.
Yeah.
It recognizes the freeing up of the caseload, the date, the month that the actual freeing up occurs. Yeah. It's actually more transparent this way too. But I'm okay with a changing a little bit like this, but I think Jennifer's got a good point about what do they say is the juice worth the squeeze here?
Okay, fair. Let's move on to our next policy. This is somewhat related to the first policy. So right now, because of the way that our MAC assignment works, we end up crediting most cases in warrant status for the full MAC amount. And so, as I was saying earlier, it's very common that at your first appearance with the client, your next court appearance is set more than 30 days out. So if the client fails to appear at their first court appearance, you would still get the full weight of that case. And so this policy combines the policy that you just heard, adds that the percentage applied is based on the date that the warrant is issued. It also lowers the amount of time that lawyers remain on cases that are in warrant status from 180 days to 90 days. That lowering of the amount of time is based on OJD's data about the rate of return on warrant cases. So that data shows that the majority of people who are on warrant status get picked up within the first 90 days, or they don't get picked up within a year. And so we were looking at that data when we picked the 90 days. There are certainly some caveats around this. I mean, I think some courts like that lawyers stay on cases that are on warrant status, because when the person does come back into the system, they already have a lawyer that they can appoint on the case. And then we know that sometimes warrants are used by courts in lieu of transport orders. So if somebody is in custody in Multnomah County, a Washington County judge might issue a bench warrant on their out of custody case. that'll put a hold on that individual. So when they're done serving their sentence in the Multnomah County Jail, they then get transported to the Washington County Jail. And so those are cases that while they're in warrant status, the lawyer may very well still be working with that client during that time period. We did try to capture some of that in the caveats to the policy. And I think this is an area where we're likely to get a lot of feedback from Oregon Judicial Department and the Oregon District Attorneys Association.
So clarifying question on this one, I'm assuming the debiting of the credit doesn't occur until the withdrawal occurs, although the weight of the debit is determined on the date of the warrant is issued. Is that an accurate reading?
That's right. Yep.
Okay, so what happens on day 92 when the person's taken into custody? Does the lawyer then get full credit plus they get the partial credit, or does it go back to full credit, or how does that? Under the old system, we knew how it worked, but how does this new system work since there's partial credits being done?
So under the new system, I think that would take you to the credit for subsequent attorneys on cases. So if the lawyer is being assigned, is it within the same law firm as the lawyer that withdrew originally, they would get 50% of the credit as the subsequent lawyer on the case. If they were outside of that law firm, it would be assigned first to a lawyer within the law firm, second to a lawyer within the same contract entity. So there we're really talking about consortia lawyers. And then finally within the same judicial district. And I think in those cases, they would get 100% of the weight.
So let me understand that. So if it's a consortia, because I sort of get how it works for the first two. The middle one, the consortia, where the lawyers are associated, but they're different. They're separate legal entities. Does that, if the consortia cannot give the case back to the same lawyer, then would that the new consortia lawyer only be credited 50%?
No, they'd get 100%. The 50%
Okay, because it's a different
only
entity.
applies
Okay.
within the same law firm.
All right. And the prior lawyer would still get whatever weighted credit they would be entitled to under this policy.
Yep. So there would be circumstances where the total added up to more than 100.
Yeah, well, that's what happens when you have to, when this happens, that's sort of the result. There's more work being done. So why, and is the point of this that we'll know within 90 days that the debit occurs to the lawyer instead of waiting 180 days? Is that the idea that it'll free up more MAC for people?
That's right. Yeah, we would know sooner that the debit occurred. And the 180 days, I think, was maybe a legacy policy from the old contracts. And so the 90 days is related to the OJD data around warrant returns.
Yeah, it's been in place for as long as I can remember. I'd also point out that I think you told us there was some study done that said X amount, the vast majority of people come back into custody within the first 30 days. So
right, that's the
I'm not,
OJD data. It's like a bell curve, but I think it's like 20, it goes down, it's like 80% are within the first 90 days.
okay.
The biggest hump is within the first 30, and then it of diminishing returns, but after you get past 90, it goes down pretty significantly.
So that should be a pretty easy way to figure out what the savings is going to be on this, because you're talking about not that many people. We still have to give the credits back for the last whatever. This actually could cost you more, couldn't it? Because if someone comes, those 20% that come in, let's say most of them come in between 90 days and 180 days, that 20%. Under the current model, there's no extra credits because they got their credit. There's nothing taken away. But under the new model, you're going to pay the prior lawyer, plus you're going to potentially pay a 1.0 credit on the new lawyer for that 20%. Isn't that right?
That's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always wondered that when OJD and other people were talking about, well, it's not fair because all these lawyers are getting credit for all these cases that are on a board. I'm thinking, well, yeah, but when the client comes back, they have to actually do the work. It's not like they're getting credit and they're not doing the work. It's just the work is delayed. So I'm not sure this is one of those like unintended consequences thing, right? That I think we need to talk about and be careful about, because I think Rob's right. We may end up paying, end up paying more.
I mean, you could just ask OJD, what if 15% of those 20% come back into custody, and what if about a third of those end up being appointed to new lawyers? What's the net savings on this? I mean, but yeah, it's interesting. If they want to do it, I guess I don't care that much. I'm just going to point out that I'm not sure there's going to be a ton of savings here, but everything counts.
Okay, next slide. So this is the co-counsel policy. Currently our contract doesn't provide guidance on when to assign co-counsel on cases, and every lawyer assigned on a case gets equal MAC credit, which really allows a lot of variance from one provider to the next about what their internal policies are in their organizations for when it's appropriate to use co-counsel on cases. And so we just don't have a lot of uniformity around co-counsel. The proposal is to require co-counsel in some situations, murder, Jessica's Law, which is mandatory minimum of 25 years, life sentences, and juvenile waiver cases. And then in all other circumstances, co-counsel would have to be approved by OPDC and lists factors that OPDC would consider in evaluating whether or not co-counsel is appropriate on cases. We have heard feedback on this from providers, questions about how it interacts with the policies around training and supervision, as well as concerns that in some more rural communities and communities that are light on lawyers, that it could be very difficult to require co-counsel on those higher level cases.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessary. And I mean, there are murders that are easier than assault cases. I mean, I think we really just have to leave the request for co-counsel to be to the individual lawyer about whether or not they need help. I mean, what we can do is we could say that it would automatically be approved if you ask in these types of cases, but not require there to be co-counsel. And then for all other case types, you have to get, special permission. But I don't think it's necessary, in my experience, to have co-counsel on all those types of cases. And it might be problematic given that we have a shortage. I don't know what other people think.
Okay, next slide. Second or subsequent attorney, this is kind of the other part of the early withdrawal, is what happens when the next lawyer gets the case. And so right now, under our current contract, every lawyer appointed to a case receives the full case weight under the MAC model. This proposal would do two things. One, it would say that a subsequent attorney appointed within the same law firm receives 50% of the case weight. And the thinking there is that a subsequent lawyer within the same law firm likely has access to the original lawyer's file, has access to, if they have a case management system, all of the notes and everything that are in the case management system. They're going to be working with the same investigator. All of the requests for specialists and all that kind of stuff will have been generated within their law firm. So while they're still going to have to do all of the work to review the case file, to meet the client and develop a relationship with the client, to develop a strategy for the case, they can at least take advantage of the existing work that has been done. That logic doesn't translate if the client is transferred outside of that law firm to a different law firm. So the first part of the proposal says that the subsequent attorney within the same firm receives 50% of the case weight. It also requires some prioritization so that when a case comes back, first it is assigned within the same firm. If that firm is not able to take that case, then it would be assigned within the same entity. And so there we're really talking about like in a consortia structure, if one firm can't take it, it would be assigned within that same consortia to a different provider in that consortia. And then finally within the same judicial district. So if it started as a public defender office case, it could go to a consortia case, or vice versa. If it started as a consortia case, it could go to the public defender's office.
So what problem are we trying to solve?
We received information that if we reduced the subsequent attorney case weight across the board, that it would make it really hard for us to get people to be conflict counsel. So if I conflict off of a case, nobody else is going to want to take that case outside of my law firm if they are going to have to take it at half credit. So we would really have a problem getting counsel for conflict cases. So we didn't want to apply the partial weighting when that happened. We don't really have the conflict problem if it's being reassigned within the same law firm.
So I shouldn't ask my question as precisely as I understood that. What problem are we trying to solve by the prioritization for assigning new counsel? That's what I was wondering.
Well, we want, first of all, if it didn't have to first be reassigned within the same law firm, there's no incentive for anybody to take the case at the 50% reduction. You would always say, oh, this lawyer is leaving this law firm. We'll assign the case to a different law firm and they can get full credit. So we really wouldn't be able to enforce the rule if we didn't first require that it be assigned within the same law firm. The second was within the same entity to encourage people to look among their peers before going to the other law firm, and then within the same judicial district, because that's how our cases are currently structured, and we pay 1.5 MAC for cases that are handled by a firm outside of that judicial district. So it would increase the amount of MAC if we looked outside the judicial district first.
Got it. That was the missing piece. Okay, thanks.
So quick question on this. So if there's a law firm and a young lawyer has a full caseload of misdemeanor, maybe lower level felonies, and they leave and the cases are reassigned within the firm, which they should do, are you saying that law firm gets another credit on that?
Right now, the law firm gets a full another credit on it, and this would reduce it to a half credit.
Well, I never knew that. We always just reassigned them within my office, never asked for more credits. I think it's wrong that happens. I think you should eliminate that. I think if a lawyer leaves, they don't get full credit. I guess does that. It says 50%. But I'm pretty surprised, honestly, that that's been the policy.
We did that too. I mean, so because the entity was already paid. So what we did, because we were a consortia, right? So the entity was paid for the case. It didn't matter which lawyer took the case. So we had an internal weighting that we did. We had a workload model within our consortia to try to caseload model to try to balance the cases to make sure that we weighted cases, we distributed them. And if one case moved from one lawyer to another, we didn't go back to the state and ask for more money. We just gave the lawyer internal credit, the new lawyer. So they got, credit for taking that case, but we didn't get paid again.
That's what I thought the policy was. That would make sense. This seems like you're rewarding people for having high turnover rates.
Well, it's a reduction over what our current contract does for cases that are turned over within the same firm. In reviewing this policy, some of the feedback that we received from providers, they pointed out that an attorney who steps into a case needs to rebuild the case from scratch to do the same work that the prior attorney did and to build trust with the client. And that attorneys have an ethical duty to their clients to review the entire case regardless of how many prior attorneys have had that case. So that the second lawyer taking the case would have significant work to do to get up to speed on the case.
All the more reason to make sure you treat your lawyers fairly and you retain them. Well, obviously, I support a 50% case weight for subsequent lawyers. I think it should probably be almost less than that, honestly, but 50%. I get, by the way, you have to review the file. I totally get that. But I do have a problem with rewarding turnover. Because there is a ton of work that's been done. Your paralegals are the same. You know, your investigator's the same. Your receptionist is the same. The work is there. The file has been built. You know, a lot of work potentially. I mean, it could be a new case, but there's a lot of work that's been done. It doesn't start from scratch.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is that there's some questions around whether 50% is the right place to put that mark down.
I'm probably fine with 50 because if you figure what the average would be, that 50% is sort of an average, I guess, because it could be you have to do a lot of work. It could be there's not that much to do, But I have no strong feeling about that.
Doesn't it depend on the case, how much work there is to do?
That's why the average should be used.
Yeah, because, if the first lawyer did an excellent job and kept excellent records and had excellent rapport with the client, then stepping in might be easy, but if the first lawyer fell down on the job for one of those reasons, the second lawyer would have a lot more work to do.
I also think it depends on the timing. If you're withdrawing, after you get the discovery and, you get the second batch of discovery and, oh, look, now I'm 50 days in and I realize I have a conflict and I'm withdrawing, and you haven't hired an investigator, or your person hasn't had their evaluation or whatever, and you've met with the client, a couple times. That's a lot different than withdrawing on the eve of trial, or withdrawing when the case needs to be set for trial or enter a plea because the client doesn't want to enter a plea, doesn't want to accept the offer, and also the lawyer is really encouraging them to take an offer, the case falls apart, and that's where you are. So that if you step in at that point, the second lawyer is going to have to basically, kind of redo all of that work, or a large amount of it, because the breakdown of the relationship is so severe that you have to, kind of like do the whole case all over again. So I think it also makes a huge difference when you're stepping into the case, how much work needs to be done.
Yeah, or what about the case where you have an offer in hand and you got court the next day to do a wired plea deal? I mean, that's why I said an average.
Yeah.
And when you're dealing with a law firm, you're not dealing with just one or two lawyers. If you're dealing with a law firm, because that's who this would apply to, a law firm, they're going to have a higher volume of cases. They're going to have a more accurate average. But 60%, fine, some number. But I think that you'll have the cases that are hard. You'll have the cases that are not as hard. Now, I will say this: when you have a lawyer that's leaving, and they know they're going to be leaving, but they don't tell you for 2 or 3 months, because that's the way it works. And you look at their caseload when they leave, and you realize they haven't done very much, or they set everything for trial. That happens. But I think it should be less than 100%, but probably at least 50%. That you've talked me into a little bit higher, because I think on the average there is some risk, and you probably want to be on the higher side of the average. So I'm supportive of the proposal. I'm not necessarily stuck on the 50%, is what I'm saying.
Okay. All right, so let's keep moving. I do have a hard out, although Mara can keep walking you all through these slides, even after I leave if we don't get through them all. This one is around contract compliance, and our current contract is kind of squishy when it comes to contract compliance, and we've heard this criticism from our commissioners. I know Rob has brought it up during commission meetings before and from other folks. So currently, OPDC notifies a contractor when it reasonably believes there's been a breach and develops a corrective plan. There's not a lot of structure in there. We reserve the right to withhold subsequent payments. And if a contractor's caseload varies by more than 15% above or below MAC for 6 consecutive months, OPDC may adjust the number of FTE unless an exception applies. The most common exception would be that they have submitted a ethical form to say that they can't ethically take more cases, or that they ethically can take more cases. So the 6 consecutive months is pretty hard to enforce. The other challenge with enforcement under our current structure is that the really the only tool in our toolbox is to reduce people's MAC. And that means cutting lawyer positions from their contract. And when we're dealing with a crisis, reducing the number of lawyers in a contract isn't a very palatable solution. So the new proposal first clarifies the expectations around caseload, then creates a process for how we notify a contractor about a breach and how we interact with them about that breach, then creates the ability for us to build a performance plan and sets forth sort of expectations for what would be in a performance plan. And then finally has corrective actions outlined. The first is withholding 1 to 5% of the funds. The reason that that percentage is selected is because that's the administrative fee that we pay on contracts. And so we could withhold that 1 to 5% without touching the attorney MAC and only be operating within the administrative fee. Reducing FTE, that's reducing attorney MAC, reducing qualifications and requiring additional mentoring and oversight. Those pieces are really looking at if the breach is around performance as opposed to quantitative, but qualitative performance, whether or not it makes sense to reduce the person's qualification level or requiring additional tools. And then finally, termination of the contract.
So thank you for doing this, Jessica. I think the outline that you've got here is pretty good. I'm not going to get into the details because there seems to be a lot of moving parts that are more contract related that you've dealt with a long time. I just want to thank you for doing this because I think it's an important part of our accountability to make sure that we are transparent. There's equity between providers and lawyers. There's an understanding of the difficulty of this work and the different capacities people can have, but there will be some expectations. And if people are not meeting their expectation, we can't have the DAs or the courts or the legislature defining what these problems are. We have to be able to identify what these issues are and what we've done to correct them. And I think this takes all of that into account. So thank you. Good luck figuring out the details and getting everyone on board with this.
Thanks, Rob. All right, let's keep cruising, Mara. Reduced caseload for first-year lawyers. So currently, all lawyers are held to the maximum attorney caseload of a maximum of 300 weighted misdemeanors, regardless of how long they've been practicing law. We have heard that 300 weighted misdemeanors is too high for lawyers in their first year of practice, and that it needs to be less than that. Alton, are you signing off?
Duty calls.
Okay, it was nice to see you. Thank you for being here.
See you guys.
And so we are proposing a reduction to half of that maximum for lawyers in their first year. This applies to only misdemeanor qualified lawyers, and they have to be receiving some training supervision during the time period. So it would put them into a reduced caseload program. That program would have some requirements associated with it. And then if they up qualify during that time period, so they move from misdemeanor qualified to felony qualified, it would no longer apply to them. So it's really just looking at folks at that entry level point. Our initial proposal was actually for 180 days, 180 misdemeanors. We heard from providers that that was still too high. And so we landed on the 150. I don't know how scientific that was. Tom?
Hi, thank you for doing this. And I'm referring now to the PDF we received to review in preparation for this meeting. The proposal seems to allow people to be in the RCP status, either if they're in their first year of licensure with the Oregon State Bar, or if they come from another jurisdiction in which they've done less than a year of criminal offense practice. And so I had a question about what that means exactly. Could that be a single case, but a year went by? I just really wonder about the metric for those out-of-state attorneys. Would it make more sense if it were a total number of cases? I mean, I'm not sure what does someone disqualify from the RCP if they come from another jurisdiction where they just touched a criminal case and then a year went by? Should we make that threshold more about, a year of actual experience than merely the passage of a year? So I wonder if there should be a case minimum or something. But I realize that's not what's on the slide. I'm referring to the handout that was sent to us.
Yeah, thank you. I couldn't fit all of the program requirements into the slide, so I appreciate that. And I think that's a good point. What does it mean to have practiced criminal law for more than a year? Does there have to be a certain number, or juvenile law, did there have to be a certain number of cases that they handled within that time period? We can bring that back to the group.
Do we want to also talk about certified law students and students who are in clinics applying caseload? I mean, I think it's appropriate to include those people as well, so that it's clear we're not saying that if you're a law student, you take 300 cases, but if you're in your first year of practice, you only take 150. So,
Okay.
yeah. And then how that interplays, right? So if you've been a certified law student, but although I guess at that point you'd probably be up qualified when you get your bar license. But yeah, I think we need to include and the supervised practice portfolio people too. All of those people I think should be wrapped in.
And we are looking at data on sort of what the impacts of this are going to be, because this is a caseload reduction. I think we're going to get a lot of feedback about if this doesn't get counterbalanced, our unrepresented population is largely misdemeanor, minor felony. Does this policy make that problem worse? And so we really need to make a data informed decision in this piece.
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is clearly going to be yes. But we have to balance that with the attrition issue. Because I mean, that's the other problem is we know that lawyers are leaving, and they're leaving in part because of, high caseloads and how hard the work is. And they're leaving like right when they get felony qualified, right? So, I mean, that's kind of the balancing is trying to make them want to stay longer by not loading them up and burning them out in the first 3 years of practice.
I was thinking the same thing, and I was thinking how to incent people who need this to do it, but not everyone who might be able to shoehorn their way into it, because that's, I think, where you'd see some real problems. What do you think about something like, obviously you're going to have standards for this, like training or mentoring standards, prior experience standards. Like we've talked about, what if you, I don't love this idea. I'm going to throw it out there though, that they get paid 95% of what a non-program lawyer would get. But after 1 year, they get a bonus equal to that lump. They get it paid out. It would encourage them to stay in there. They would still get the pay. People get hired under this program. Say, here's a new program for you. It's reduced caseloads. We're going to see how this is. You're not going to start it. What does PD start at, like 80,000 a year? Maybe you're going to start at 72 or 75. However, at the end of the year, you're going to get a $10,000 bonus if you make it the year. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of a way to not necessarily encourage, someone with 2 or 3 years experience who probably could do more than 150 cases, maybe, but they might technically qualify. But also try and get those folks to stay at least a year doing this work. I don't know. Maybe that's too complicated. Maybe it's best just to leave it like it is.
Yeah, the issue with the bonuses would be that we don't actually pay compensation for any of these folks. So that would be something that maybe their employer could incentivize in terms of like how they're going to compensate them. But
so maybe that could be part of the program for someone to get into it. I don't know. Maybe that's too complicated or getting too far into the weeds, trying to dictate to the employer though. I mean, you could put it up to 180, which would have less negative impact on the MAC.
yeah, and I think we do need to be really data informed in this part and think about what we're actually seeing in our current caseload report, because I do think that we are already seeing that these lawyers in their first year aren't hitting their 300 MAC. And so law firms that have a lot of first year lawyers chronically look like their MAC is under, and that this is part of what's driving that. So we want to make sure that we're sort of capturing what's actually happening in the practice as well.
In general, I like it.
Okay. All right. Next one, Mara. Oh, I think this is our last one, so I'll stay a little bit a little bit past 6:30. Okay. So currently our vacancy funding provides full compensation for the first 60 days with position authority for that entity to fill the position. And then under certain circumstances, entities can ask that be extended an additional 60 days. And that is then partially funding, I want to say at $72,000 a year, prorated for 60 days for that entity to be able to cover their overhead expenses while they're looking to hire. And they continue to have position authority to fill that vacancy. Our proposal is a pretty significant reduction. It would immediately reduce the funding to 50% for the first 60 days and keep the authority to fill the position for only those first 60 days. On the positive side, this would be a significant savings to the agency and would give the agency a lot more flexibility to reallocate MAC pretty quickly to places where somebody is saying, hey, I've got a lawyer I can hire if you guys have the ability to fund my contract to be able to add somebody, I can add somebody. And that could be an entity within the same judicial district, or it could be, hey, there's available MAC in Marion County and there's ability to hire in Jackson County, and being able to more quickly move it from one area to another. We've heard a lot of feedback from providers around this, and I will flag 2 potential areas that I think I want the commission to really be aware of. The first is some of our providers hire classes of lawyers, and they'll do in the end of the summer, after people have sat for the bar examination, they'll hire 10, 15 lawyers. They will train them as a cohort and bring them in. And so how does this position authority, really the position authority piece of it, intersect with with law firms that are trying to hire classes of new lawyers and train them all up together? And then the other part that we've heard feedback about that I want to raise up is for how does this intersect with the Family Medical Leave Act, with FEMLA? Because these are all independent contractors, the state doesn't have a FEMLA obligation to them. But for employers who have people that go on FEMLA, if they're on protected leave for a period of longer than 60 days and they lose the position authority to rehire that person, does it create problems for them where they are terminating people from their employment who are out on protected leave? I think that's a complicated question for us because we don't employ any of these people, right? This is all an independent contractor situation for us. But people who do employ staff are raising that this policy change may create problems within their law firms for FEMLA.
Can we get legal advice from DOJ about that? We can't be the only state agency in the entire state that has to deal with this. There are other agencies that probably use contractors who have this situation. I mean, I understand that, and I am sympathetic, but I mean, let's just take it to its logical extreme, right? Somebody goes out on FEMLA for 8 months. We're not going to fund a vacancy position for 8 months because someone's on protective leave in a law firm. That's not happening. So, yeah, I mean, we can't, yeah. So I think we need to figure out how those things intersect. I mean, I was one of the people when this came up the last time around when we had this policy that sort of thought that it was a little more generous than it needed to be. Just because I think by shortening it, we create a incentive to hire as quickly as possible. And I recognize sometimes it's difficult to do that. But I also think that sometimes if vacancies go on for a really long time, there's a lot of money sitting there that is not spent on what it's supposed to be spent on. And we need to be able to have the flexibility for contractors in underserved communities. And by underserved, I mean the people who have large unrepresented issue, to be able to hire in lawyers if they have that ability. So it would be very beneficial to be able to move MAC around.
I agree with that. I think that the proposal is closer, I think would be my preference than the prior. But I do have one question. You brought up the cohort situation. I know we had this in Washington County with MPD. They would hire in cohorts and their contract would go up July 1, but they really wouldn't bring folks on board till October 15th quite often. Are they getting paid for all of those cases? Are they getting paid for all those positions for that, 3.5 months?
No, we put start dates on the when we start the payment, but they may very well have the MAC allocated to them for that time period, which means it's not available in other places.
Oh, well, that's unfortunate because that funding maybe could be used other places. But on the other hand, they don't want to have it taken away from them either, I guess. So,
and I think we see this I expect we'll see more of that as we have these law clinics, right, that are associated. We've got one in Marion County, one in Lane County, and one in Multnomah County with Lewis and Clark, U of O, and Willamette. And they're going to be wanting to, the law clinics are going to pair with some of these public defense providers, and they're going to want to be able to hire classes of students that have gone through the clinics. And so how do we make that work within the current MAC structure if we are not, if we're withdrawing the position authority to hire? How do they make offers to these law students? Because I think they're making the offers significantly in advance of the law students taking the jobs.
Can we make an exception? We've talked about this for years. Making kind of an exception or creating a sort of different category for the nonprofit public defenders, because that's who we're talking about. We're talking about the nonprofit public defenders, so that they have the ability to know that these positions will be funded and that they have position authority for, I mean, is there some way we can, I mean, I want to solve the problem and I don't want to impact that particular issue. So can we create a policy that lets them do that, but also deals with the vacancies in, you know, consortia or smaller entities where there's vacancies that they can't fill for a long time and we're just going to deal with it by, you know, okay, we're going to put a state trial division lawyer there. I mean, I think we need to be able to address those issues and not have, you know, this giant pot of money building with a entity that's not actually hiring lawyers for the positions.
Right. And we might be able to deal with them separately, right? We might be able to have a policy around hiring classes that is different from our vacancy policy.
I think that's a good idea. And because a lot of this to me is transparency, because a lot of the stuff we talk about, I know when I was bidding on contracts, trying to figure out what it would cost, you know, I knew that 20% of the people would FTA, right? And I knew this. I knew there'd be this many trials. I would know this. And so when you start fiddling around with some of these policies like warrant withdrawal and all that stuff, it really doesn't affect just that case. It affects how you're looking at the entire cost of what you're doing. And you guys know this, you ran offices. And so this is one of those cases. But to be transparent, instead of like stuffing your training money into, you know, oh, we're going to increase your rates because you're public defenders, but we're not going to pay you for training, but we know you're using it for training. I mean, that was always very non-transparent. That's why I always argued for a training budget. But this is another one that Jennifer points out, and you too, Jesse, that this is, I'm not saying it's an exception, it's just a program. It is the nonprofit cohort, it's the nonprofit track, right? And this is the nonprofit track, and that should be okay. And a consortia should be okay with that. And I don't think you'll get a lot of pushback.
Okay.
Quick question on that. So I would like to explore that idea you had, but also the quick question. So 50% for 60 days, when you say it can be extended, is that extended for another 60 days? Is that the idea? And then that's it pretty much, or what?
Oh, under the policy, it doesn't get extended after that.
Under
It's
the new
60
one.
days, under the new one. Yeah, currently it's full funding for the first 60 days and then it can be extended to
Yeah.
120 and it drops down to 72,000 a year, which is like overhead expenses. So
Yeah.
this would just drop it in half right out of the gates, and it wouldn't be extended.
Yeah. Well,
Which we have heard from rural providers that the recruitment challenges in rural areas make the 60-day deadline unrealistic for them to be able to fill those positions.
right. So what I would suggest considering is for sure the 50% drop, because 50% is sort of your lawyer cost, right? I mean, that's why we're doing it. There's no sense in paying salary and benefits for someone who's they're not paying it. But maybe after 60 days, if they can show they're diligently working, you know, they've got interviews set up, whatever, you could extend it for another 60 days at 50% or something. Because it is hard to hire a good person in 60 days, even in the metro area when the market is bad. And sometimes the person can't start right away either. They got to give notice. So realistically, I got to identify someone in 30 days. They're going to give 30 days notice, and then, you know, it's 60 days out.
Right.
Maybe
So,
just say upon a showing that, you know, the contractor is making diligent efforts to fill the position can be extended for another 60 days or whatever. But
Yeah.
just, yeah,
And I mean, the flip side of that coin is that we don't have the ability to shift that MAC someplace else during that time period. And so it does tie the agency's hands in terms of the flexibility. We might want to add there has been issues with some firms around rolling vacancies too. So
Yeah.
let's say you have a vacant position and then 3 weeks later, somebody else leaves. And so now you've got 2 vacant positions. You fill your oldest vacant position first, and then you have the next vacant position. So you can keep filling the oldest vacant position and continue to have funded vacancies within your organization, which ties up our funding and our ability to reallocate those resources to another area. So I don't know if we want to maybe put a cap on the total percentage of vacancies that could be open within an entity in a period of time.
I think that's a good idea. I've been aware of that problem as well. And however, by cutting down to 15% immediately, you reduce the incentive to do that, which is good.
Right.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, but I think those are all good ideas worth considering. I like the general idea. Obviously, the details are
Yeah.
maybe not exactly set in stone yet, but I do like the idea of addressing the rolling vacancies. 60 days is not enough to hire attorneys in many, many cases.
Right.
And whether you do a month-to-month reduction, like you said, I know you want to lose. If someone wants to fill it, they're going to be pretty active looking for somebody pretty quickly. I think you're going to know it. So, but maybe put the responsibility on the provider to prove what they've done to do something.
All right, Rob, let's let Jesse go.
Yep. All right.
Thank you
I gotta
so
go
much.
too.
All right, it's good to see you all.
Thank you.
All
Have a
right.
good
All right, thanks very much. All right,
See
bye.
y'all.